Okay, well, since you're talking about it already, what is the history of charismatics?
Yeah, so like I was
Because
talking
that's
about,
the next question.
right, right. No, that's a good question. So, yeah, so if the Pentecostal movement began in 1906, okay,
Mhm.
that's kind of where it has its marking or its beginning point. Then the charismatic movement is like mid 20th century, okay, and
Okay.
so again, this is where the Pentecostal movement became kind of very specific, and you had like actual like Pentecostal denominations. So, for example, the
Okay.
Assemblies of God is a Pentecostal denomination.
Did I ask you about Pentecostals or charismatics?
Charismatics?
I'm not trying to throw anything back in your face. You just started saying Pentecostal a lot, and I was like, is that what I asked?
No. So I'm getting there.
Did I mess up?
No.
Okay.
No.
I thought I messed up.
No, you did not mess up. So what I'm saying is like, for the Pentecostals, you end up kind of like with these specific Pentecostal churches and denominations.
Okay.
All right. The charismatic movement began happening in the mid 20th century, where it was actually going not just in these, Pentecostal sections or specific denominations, but the charismatic movement began to spread throughout mainline denominations and even into Catholicism. And so there was a charismatic movement in the Methodist Church.
Wow, back to the beginning.
There's a charismatic movement in the Catholic Church. And what they were known as these charismatic renewals. Okay.
Oh,
and so there was this movement.
So it's just people who think that fruits of the Holy Spirit are for today,
or gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And so kind of like, again, the keystones of these are like healings, miracles, prophecy, tongues.
Okay.
And this movement of the Holy Spirit began going through the different denominations within Christianity, and again, including Catholicism. And there was these charismatic renewals in all of these denominations.
Okay.
And so, and I won't say all of them, but in a lot of the denominations.
Okay.
And that's really the beginning part of the charismatic movement as we know it today.
So nobody for all of Christian history thought that we could speak in tongues until the 1900s?
No. It's just that's where the labels started being created.
Oh, okay.
Like Pentecostal charismatics. No, I mean like, and so you go back all the way to the early church, right? Or even to the writings of Paul, like they're talking to Christians, for example, in Corinth about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. All right. And so that's what I kind of alluded to earlier with 1 Corinthians 12. So Paul's addressing them and saying, hey, you have all the gifts of the Holy Spirit. You're moving in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So there's a whole chapter on chapter 12 and a whole chapter on chapter 14 about how to use the gifts in the context of assembling together. Okay. And so, no, charismatics, you can trace the movement or the theology and the belief that the gifts of the Holy Spirit were for today or for that period of time. You can trace that all the way back to the very beginning. So I actually had a professor at Emory University at the Candler School of Theology I was in, and that was one of his works, was that tracing the movement of the Holy Spirit from from Paul, from the early church in Acts chapter 2, all the way, through Paul, and then in continuing on to today. Okay. And so there's always been a direct line and movement that you can trace back to of individuals that believed that the gifts of the Holy Spirit were not just for Bible times, if you were, but were for all time. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the history of the charismatics.
Yeah, and I'll say this too.
Okay.
I gotta say this because I'm a Wesley guy. So like,
okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that, especially as Protestants, that we look back to and we go, see, there was a movement of the Holy Spirit, is what we know as the Great Awakening in the 1700s. Second Great Awakening in the 1800s.
After the Dark Ages.
Yeah, after the Dark Ages.
Okay.
And so, but when you look back at that time, like for example, in the 1700s, there was this incredible movement of God that was involving John Wesley and George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards here in the States and here in the States and in England. Okay. And then the UK. And so, But as Wesley would write about in his journals, that he would talk about how he was open air preaching, which is something George Whitefield actually introduced to Wesley.
Okay.
And he was open air preaching, and he said people would be falling from the trees under the power of the Holy Spirit.
Oh, you've told me this before.
Yeah, and so there was this big move.
And I thought that was ridiculous and dumb.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's basically the way it went.
Great job.
And so, but there was this movement of God, of the Holy Spirit. And so even back then, they're praying for people. They're seeing people get healed. People are speaking in tongues. People are prophesying. That was all happening in the 1700s, the Great Awakening, and the 1800s, the Second Great Awakening, all the way up to Azusa Street in the early 1900s. And then there was a movement through Wales, the Welsh Revival. And
Wales?
Wales.
Okay.
Yeah, the Welsh Revival, and in the early 1900s as well. And so you're seeing all of this happening. It's just that the names like, oh, those are the Pentecostals, or those are the Charismatics, those names or labels weren't used until the 20th century.